For months, what's going on in the Capitol has followed the candidates onto the trail. Now, it threatens to take some of them off the road at a crucial time. 5 candidates who are also senators preparing to trade precious face time with voters for long days in D.C. Those voters keenly aware time with some of these candidates could soon be scarce. Candidates and staff alike now trying to contend with juggling these two massive political moments. So how do you juggle it, though? Do you fly back and forth? Have you thought about it at all?
No one knows yet what this trial is going to look like and how Mitch McConnell is going to run it.
My strategy is to be in New Hampshire a lot.
How do you balance that, though, with an impeachment trial?
We're going to have to.
With the senators bouncing between the trail and a trial, the rest of the field can campaign unencumbered. But that doesn't mean they're enthusiastically campaigning on impeachment.
The question is not first and foremost, what about impeachment?
Out here on the trail, our job is to talk to voters about how their lives are going to be impacted by who's sitting in the White House.
We have to stop being obsessed over impeachment.
And when impeachment is on voters' minds, most candidates try to tie it back to a larger campaign theme.
But the way I see this is we've now seen the impact of corruption, and that's what's clearly on the stage in 2020.
Congress can walk and chew bubble gum at the same time.
Perhaps the ultimate test of doing two things at once.
My colleague Ali Vitali laying out the stakes for the 5 Democratic senators running for president that will also have to participate in the still-to-be-scheduled Senate impeachment trial. Of that group, Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey is the only one who's up for re-election in 2020. The table is back. Basil, I mean, yes, they can walk and chew gum at the same time, theoretically. I'd like to see them do it. But they can't physically be in 2 places at the same time. And this comes down to a scheduler on each of those campaigns deciding where they're going to be and when. If you were running one of these campaigns, how would you counsel your candidate?
Well, really invest in staff. You got to have some great surrogates. And if you didn't do that already, it's going to become a problem because you're going to have folks like Andrew Yang and Pete Buttigieg in there because they don't have Joe Biden, who don't have a formal role in this process, taking some of your valuable time away while you're doing God's work in the Senate. That said, it is a process that has always favored folks with money and folks with a very strong ground game. So even with that said, and even while they're in D.C., I expect folks like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren to still have a very strong presence in those early states. But it is going to be a challenge.
And Jonathan, if you're not in that top tier of candidates, is this the moment where you really need to do the deep digging and the analysis about whether or not the risk is worth the reward?
Well, I think the ones who are still in it are going to take their chances on the caucuses, which are coming up.
Yep.
And not necessarily New Hampshire, but at least see how they do in Iowa. Why drop out at this point? So especially if you're not one of the senators. But I think for somebody like Amy Klobuchar, who has a chance to maybe emerge, she's got a little bit. I'm not sure I'd call it momentum, but she's rubbing some sticks together and getting some sparks. But you want to be on the ground. It's really important to be in the state. So if you're in Washington for a 2-week trial in the middle of January, that's really a problem. And if Joe Biden is also beginning to get a little bit of momentum, he had a good debate, and he's there every day doing retail politics, which he does quite well, that really gives him an advantage that we maybe haven't focused on enough.
I mean, Jackie, the cost here is obvious, but there is also potential reward. I mean, if you are Amy Klobuchar, she had some big moments during the Kavanaugh hearing when she did have the attention of lots of Americans, of lots of voters. How do you turn this lemon into lemonade?
Well, the problem here, as Ali pointed out in her fantastic piece, is that these senators have to sit in silence all day long. They can't ask any questions. They can't have any viral moments. The most that
in general, hard for them to sit in silence.
Yeah, exactly. Although Mitch McConnell seems to believe that this is a good test of their conscience for them and, humbles them a bit. But for someone like Amy Klobuchar, that's going to mean even more limited airtime. There's a possibility that they can have press conferences after these long days of, these White House, the White House lawyers and the House managers who are officiating these trials. But if there's anything that Donald Trump knows how to do, it's how to suck up all the oxygen in the room. And the story is going to be focused on him during a time where normally the American public would be paying attention to the First in the Nation primary and caucus.
If there was a surprise guest that could force people to pay attention, it would likely be former President Barack Obama, and
Yes.
he has said he would not endorse. And yet there is this reporting from The Hill saying behind the scenes in recent months, former President Obama has gone to bat for Warren. When speaking to donors reluctant to support her given her knocks on Wall Street and the wealthy, the former president has stopped short of an endorsement of Warren in these conversations and has emphasized that he is not endorsing in the Democratic primary race. But he has also vouched for her credentials, making it clear in these private sessions that he deems her a capable candidate and potential president, sources say.
The level of direct and indirect shade that Obama has thrown at Joe Biden, I mean, everything that leaks out of his campaign, everything that leaks out of his former office is, Joe, I really don't think you should do this. Joe, I really don't think you should do this. And this is particularly powerful given what a sort of acrimonious relationship Elizabeth Warren sometimes had with Obama when he was in office. Now, I don't think he's going to pop out. I don't think he's going to do anything to disrupt this process. What I do see is this. We think of sort of Obama in one place, Mitch McConnell, and these senators who are running. It makes me think of, like, was it the 2000 election where George Bush kept trying to get the debates during Game 6 of the World Series and nobody's going to pay attention? Mitch McConnell can read a calendar, and so can Chuck Schumer. Schumer is not going to let Mitch set up this trial in a way that's going to disrupt the primary process. And if that means that this ends up going longer, if that means that we don't do anything until after Super Tuesday, that may be what occurs, because there's not a chance that Democrats are going to allow, especially if it's competitive, if Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are all really close, you're not going to have two people get pulled out of the game just because Mitch McConnell thinks this is a good chance for us to run against the weakest candidate.
I mean, does it surprise you to hear President Obama saying that about Elizabeth Warren?
Well, after he said that women have if women lead countries, right, it's we're in a much better place. It's not surprising. He has thrown a lot of shade the way of Joe Biden. And
do you think that's more of a boon for Elizabeth Warren or a bust for Joe Biden?
No, it's a bust for Joe Biden because he's running on the Obama relationship. Right. But I will make this one caveat. If you think about the role that Bernie Sanders has played since 2016 in sort of reshaping rules at the DNC, reshaping rules within state parties across the country, it also favors him quite a bit because he's forcing a lot of folks, including Elizabeth Warren, to sort of run a race similar to the rules and the sort of pattern that he's already laid down. So while all of this stuff is happening, he's viewed almost, for right or wrong, as the most consistent sort of candidate out there. And where even if Obama is sort of leaning towards or giving these hints that Elizabeth Warren's the right choice, in some ways, I still think it's going to, in some ways, it highlights that tension between her and Bernie Sanders.
I do want to remind, though, our viewers that Obama was also the person who said that our candidates should be more moderate, that voters are not in the mood for super progressive and leftist ideas and policies.
I think he's still trying to be an honest broker, and he's essentially saying to a lot of folks that you meet in New York, the coastal elites who are some of them are scared of Elizabeth Warren. He's basically saying, don't be afraid of her. If she's nominated, things are going to still be okay. That doesn't mean he's for her or necessarily trying to diss Joe Biden.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.